Hi everyone, it's William. This is my second video in the Grand Duke Dmitri Diary series, taped at Schatzalp, former sanatorium, now Hotel Schatzalp in Davos, Switzerland, where Dmitri spent about he spent about 2.5 years at Schatzalp, and the last 2.5 years of his life. He arrived here in September 1939, still a little jet lagged, and he died on the 5th of March, 1942. And today I am actually in the old director's apartment. It's no longer used in that capacity. The head doctor here lived in a villa next door to the sanatorium, and this apartment was occupied by the business manager or the director. And at the time Dmitri was here, his name was Arnold Walter Federle, and he'd already been here for quite a long time. And he knew Dmitri well. He liked him. Dmitri also liked Federle, and in fact had visited this apartment. He took at least one picture from this apartment. And yeah, so there's a lot of hustle and bustle in the hotel today. It's the last day that the funicular, the cable car that comes up from town, is running, and there are no guests at the moment, but there's a lot of work going on with the staff. So I thought this was a really quiet place to do this. And I will be moving on to other places, including Dmitri's room. But yeah, right now, I'll probably post some videos giving sort of a tour of Schatzalp, but right now you can just see, what can you see? A little bit of the apartment heading toward a little terrace, outside terrace. This is on the first floor, not the ground floor, but the first floor. Anyway, that's enough about that. So we are up to the final part of the long diary entry of the 30th of April, 1921, part 7, last part. The recap for part 6, Dmitri went to confession for the first time since the Rasputin assassination, and it was very difficult for him to do that. He says that Maria didn't pressure him, but she made it known that she thought it was a good idea and that she wanted him to do it. And then she prayed while he was doing it. She prayed for him that it would go well, and apparently it did. It went very well. And I mentioned in the previous video that oftentimes when someone is killed, whether accidentally or in a murder or through negligence, a certain period of time is asked for by the priest. It's asked that the person abstain from communion for a certain period of time. And so I wondered about whether that would be the case with Dmitri. But, you know, since the whole thing had happened in 1916, and since he clearly expressed remorse and was remorseful, and yeah, I don't know. We don't know what went on between him and the priest, except that he said it went very well. And I should have read ahead a little more carefully. I have a problem with this all the time. I just glance at the next section so that I can tell you what's coming up next. And I thought it was going to be a description of the actual physical experience of going into the church and going to communion, but actually no. This section that we're doing today is about Dmitri's experience at the church for the late night liturgy on Pascha or on Easter, and his experience of that. So he did take communion for the first time, clearly, since whenever he had taken it, if indeed he had taken it in 1916, probably at least once in 1916 he would have taken it. So anyway, that's what we're doing today, and our cast is just Maria, Dmitri, and the people who were at the Russian Orthodox Church that night. And this would have been St. Alexander Nevsky Church in Paris on the Rue d'Arroux. And we can talk a little bit about that later in case you want to visit the Rue d'Arroux. The church there is still there and it's beautiful. Okay, let's dive in. The number of people in the church was frightful. And of course, the undignified behavior of the crowd during the Eucharist completely spoiled the mood. Everyone rushed forward, pushing and stepping on each other in order to be the first to approach the chalice. It was like something out of a nightmare, and so frightfully at odds with what should have been the mood. We could actually have received the Eucharist in a private room, like we always did with Papa, but apparently the priest wasn't too happy with that idea, and neither Maria nor I particularly wanted to insist. So I had to receive the Eucharist in the nave and go through that horror of pushing and shoving, and even do some of it myself. And of course, that did not contribute to the creation of a peaceful and reverent mood. There were moments when our compatriots were astonishingly repulsive, and then one was simply ashamed on their behalf. And now I'll begin my description of how I spent each day. So that's what we'll be doing. We'll be beginning with next time. Meanwhile, yeah, lots to say about this one. Very interesting. So, I can begin by remarking that for most of us who are not in the uppermost echelon of privilege, this is, if not a daily, at least a frequent experience that we've had since childhood of being, amongst people who are in crowded situations, being jostled and having people be loud and so on and so forth. And, it's just what you do. It's just what you experience, I should say. And yeah, most of us do it at some point as well. But for Dmitri, this was really something new. He was raised in quite a sheltered environment, and he wasn't having to stand in line or to be amidst crowds of people. And so it's not surprising that he found it a little frightening, or, at least as he says, frightful. So, yeah, I was thinking about the times previous to this when he had been amongst crowds, and it had happened even when he was a child. I should have brought Maria's first volume of memoirs with me. I only brought the second, but because I don't remember that clearly, but in the first volume of memoirs, she talks about an incident on a holiday in Russia, I think related to Pascha, could have been a different church holiday, when she and Dmitri were actually grabbed by a crowd kind of exultant and ecstatic and borne away by them for, a short distance. Gosh, I wish I could remember the details of that. And then after the revolution, when he was in Tehran and in France and in Paris and in London, he had experiences of going out and joining a crowd of people. Once he went with Lady Marling to view a religious procession, a Muslim Shiite religious procession in Tehran. It was a big crowd of people. Another time, he attended both victory parades, the one in London and the one in Paris. And there were tons and tons of people, and Lucia was embarrassing him by sort of going on ahead and trying to clear people out of his path, saying, this is Grand Duke Dmitri, and that just embarrassed Dmitri. But so he had some experience of being among crowds, but this was clearly different. This was something that he had specific memories of going to this church in Paris with his father and his sister, and they were given communion in a separate part of the church, privately. So this was quite a new experience for him. And indeed, in Tehran, he had gone on Pascha, on Easter, to the late night service, but he'd left before the liturgy started, and he didn't actually go into the church. I think also in London, because it was too crowded then, and so he only was outside the church. He didn't have this experience of trying to reach the altar to take communion, or not the altar, but the area in front of the altar. The altar is behind the iconostasis, although the doors would have been open, so you could have seen the altar. Yeah, okay, so this was new to him, and it's very interesting to me that the priest here has made it clear to them, obviously, that he does not want to give them communion separately, and Dmitri is of the opinion that if they had dug in their heels, he and Maria, that the priest would have given way and agreed to do that. But, here was this kind priest that had just heard his confession, so they weren't going to do that. And that's not, you don't want to antagonize the priest under any circumstances. And so the fact of the matter is that in the Orthodox Church, the sense of community is really, really important. The sense that this is not just individual people coming together for the Eucharist, but there's a saying that my Greek Orthodox priest, says that we're either saved together or none of us is saved at all. And the Eucharist is the absolute center of that sense of community, and that's what the community is anchored in. And even at my own church, when one of the priests decided that it would be good to do a learning Eucharist for the children of the Sunday school, that once a month they would have their own Eucharist in an annex of a church that had a chapel that could be used for that. And the priest would explain things at each step of the way. And I attended that because Sunday school teachers were expected to attend with their class. And it created a scandal. I mean, it ended up happening. It ended up being done. But the idea that the community should ever be divided in any way for the Eucharist is non-canonical and just not something that is usually done. So yeah, it ruffled some feathers. But they must have had the permission of the bishop, or they wouldn't have been able to do it. Okay, so that would have, anyway, in what I'm trying to say is that would have been very bad form for Dmitri and Maria to have insisted on that. And in fact, I'm a little surprised and not surprised, that previously when Grand Duke Paul was arrived, that was done, because it was not the right thing to do, and the priest knew it was not the right thing to do. Anyway, royalty has its privileges, I guess. Okay. The other one thing I wanted to say, in case you think that Dmitri sounds like a real sort of entitled, snobbish person. Oh, he doesn't want to be among the common herd. He doesn't like the way they're behaving. Well, I would tell you that in my opinion, he was probably not wrong about the behavior he encountered and about the way that it destroyed the mood. That he'd gone to confession, it'd been very touching and moving. He told us he felt changed by it. He wanted to go to church and have a spiritual experience on Pascha, and he didn't, because of the sort of rowdy behavior. And I myself have experienced exactly that phenomenon. And when that happens, by the time you get to the chalice, you're just angry. And you probably shouldn't even take communion, because you're not supposed to take it in an angry frame of mind. But this is the reality. People do behave this way. They chat and they laugh, and then when it's time for the Eucharist, they all sort of pile out. Some churches there are pews. Traditionally, in Orthodox churches, there are not pews, and as I recall, there aren't pews. Definitely not pews at Alexander Nevsky. So you have a big group of people. Women would be on one side, men on the other. In a very traditional Orthodox church, that's not the way it is, for instance, at my Greek Orthodox church, which does have pews. But everybody is making a run for to get up front to get communion. And yeah, it can get a bit hairy. You do have people pushing and shoving, and that's shameful, but that's the reality. I mean, of all times to do that, that would be the most shameful time to do that. But yeah, it is what it is. So undoubtedly, Dmitri, not having experienced that before and not even having seen it, if he was always given communion in a royal chapel or in a separate environment, he was probably genuinely and justifiably shocked by that. So I'm not going to say that that's a point against him or a reflection on who he was as a person. It just shocked him and it ruined it for him. And I really understand that. It's so nice when that's not the case, and you can take that sense of reverence and awe all the way up to the chalice. Okay, and he admits that he even ended up doing a little of the jostling himself. And if somebody pushes you, yeah. So, gosh, I've gone longer than I thought I would with this pretty short diary entry, but I wanted to say a little bit about Pascha, and I wanted to encourage you to go to an Orthodox Pascha service if there's an Orthodox church in your town, not because I'm trying to convert anyone, but because it's a real experience, and I think you'll enjoy it. So that will be on April 20th this year, or rather it will be on April 19th. You go first to the people who want to make sure they have a place in the church will come for Orthros, which is usually a morning service. But before every liturgy, you have to have both Orthros and Vespers. It's weird because in my church we use the Greek word for matins, which is Orthros, but we use the Latin word for the evening service, which is Vespers. So before every liturgy, you have to have Orthros and Vespers. So Orthros and Vespers in an abbreviated form usually start about 11 o'clock. And if you're there by then, at least in Portland, Oregon, you definitely can get a place in the church. I'm not sure. I tried once when I was in Paris for Pascha to go to the Rue de Rue. I can't remember what time I got there. Might have been fairly late, but I never made it inside the church. It was still touching with the crowd outside the church and the priests come out. And yeah, so then at midnight, all the lights are turned out in the church, all of them. All the candles are burned out or are blown out in front of the icons. And the young ladies of the church come with candles that are lit by the priest, and they come and they light the candles of the people that are there in the church. Everybody has a big candle, not just a little one. And then each person turns to the person next to them and lights their candle. And this is slightly before midnight, and pretty soon the whole church is illuminated by candlelight. And then the priest comes, and from being completely dark, it is full of light, full of candlelight, and the declaration is made that Christ is risen. In Russian, Christos воскресе. And then the congregation replies, Воистину воскресе. And the song is sung that every year. It's sung at Easter and during Bright Week, and it really gives me chills. I don't know it in Russian, but in Greek, it's also beautiful. It's Byzantine. It's not Western style like in a Russian church, but it's also beautiful. Christos anesti ek nekron. And everybody holds up their candles and makes the sign of the cross. And then you turn to the people around you and say Kali Anastasi and kiss them. And yeah, it's just absolutely wonderful. And yeah, you go outside the church, and there's an area set up outside of the church, and it's at that point everybody is kind of elated. But all of this is before what Dmitri experienced. So if you're not receiving communion, the vast majority, well, yeah, the majority of people come for this beautiful ceremony that culminates at midnight, and then they go home. Or rather, most of them don't go home. They go to private parties to break the fast and to celebrate. So the next day, on the actual Easter Sunday, there will be lots of house parties as well. But the big parties where you go and well, you go after church usually. I went to one in London with an old Gallitzin, Prince Emmanuel Gallitzin, and that was great fun, he and his wife. But anyway, that then you have the hardcore parishioners go back into the church, and the liturgy starts. And the liturgy is, if you go to liturgy, you probably won't go home until about 2 a.m. And so clearly, in this instance on the Rue de Rue, lots and lots of people stayed for the liturgy. And yeah, in the Orthodox Church, to receive communion, you go up to the front, hopefully in an orderly procession. In this case, not. You go up to the priest. There would have been more than one priest to handle so many people. And the priest says, if the priest doesn't know your name, your Christian name, you tell him your name, and then the priest will say, in my church, because my Christian name is Dmitri, the church will say, the servant of God, Demetrius, receives the body and blood of Christ. The bread is crumbled and it's not unleavened bread, it's not wafers, it's leavened bread, because Christ is the leaven. And so it's broken up into little pieces. It's actually put in the wine, in the chalice. There's a little spoon, and each person gets a little fragment of the bread and the wine directly into their mouth. And then you go and receive a piece of antidoron, which in Greek means not the gift. So it's consecrated. It's blessed bread, but it's not the Eucharist. And you can take as many pieces of that as you like. And if you have non-Orthodox friends that are with you at church, you take pieces of it for them. And yeah, it's great. It's great when people aren't behaving badly, as in this instance. Anyway, I have gone too long with that. So what do we have next time? Well, we're going back 2 weeks, as we always do with Dmitri, to the 16th of April, to Vichy, the last day in Vichy with Coco. And so we'll be hearing more about Coco in these daily diary entries. And in the next one, we'll learn a little bit about how they weren't quite communicating with each other effectively. So I think you'll find that interesting. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.